Okay, this video is about controlling the three main variables to effective color mixing. Hue is simply the color from your tube. Value is something you've explored with previous paintings. So here I want to focus especially on saturation. And saturation simply is a color's brightness or dullness. And why is this so important? It does several things. It helps you figure out what paints to use to get a desired color. It increases spatial depth in your painting. In other words, it gives you the illusion that elements are more distant or closer to the viewer. Varying saturation lets you control what is emphasized in your painting and the overall emotional feel of your work. And finally, I'm going to talk a note about that saturation is contextual. Something dull can look incredibly bright if everything else is really dull. Okay, so the first thing, naming a color. If you know these three variables, you can find any color. So naming the hue plus the saturation plus the value will give you the color you're looking for. You can get a duller or less saturated color by adding a bit of color from the opposite side of the color wheel, the complementary color. For example, making a red duller by adding green, making a purple duller by adding yellow, making a blue duller by adding orange. So let's try it here. Ask yourself, what is the hue of this rectangle? What is the value of this rectangle? And what is the saturation? And these are somewhat subjective, and they may vary between us. So I think that the color is a blue-green. And the value, it looks fairly light, very light actually. And it is not too bright or too dull. Note that this is different than light or dark, the saturation. So to get this color on my palette, I would choose a blue, I would mix in a little bit of green, then I'd add a lot of white, and then a small amount of orange. Try it with this color. For this color I got, orange is the hue, the value was kind of medium, and it was fairly dull saturation. So to mix it, I would take an orange, I'd mix a little bit of white and some blue to it. And for this one, see what you'd get. And here's what I got. It's really important to see value and saturation separately. You can have a color that's light and dull, or dark and bright, like this one here. The light and dark are very different than bright and dull. They're two separate things. And finally, here's just one more for practice. Try doing this exercise with walls in your house. If you have white walls, try doing it without saying the word white. What would you name the color in that case? Try doing it with wood. What would you name it if you couldn't name it as brown? In a different lecture, I'll cover pictorial depth more completely, as it's a bit more involved. But I want to just let you know controlling saturation is important for creating depth in your painting. So just very briefly, colors become less saturated as they go back in space. So the trees in the background of this are much duller green than the greens in the canoe and in the water. And this one, the colors, even a shallow depth of field, a dull background pushes the object forward and lets the background fall away. So you can see the dull blues and browns in that background wall make it so that the brighter blues in the bottles and the jars and the orange of that wood shelf pop much farther forward. Controlling saturation can change how your painting feels. A full saturation screams at the viewer at full volume. This painting was probably made with color straight out of the tube. Because of that, it's vibrant and energetic, and it feels like fireworks exploding, even though they're plant-like forms. Matisse often used full saturation to explore possibilities with colors that at the time were new and far more intense than earlier formulations. Critics often called him a wild beast, a fauvist, for such unrestrained use of color. But when you do use full saturation, often it is so bright that nothing stands out in particular. It's like shouting all the time. Nothing's emphasized because everything is emphasized. So artists often choose to modulate their level of saturation. So some colors pop and some others fall back. In this painting, the small moments of reds and yellows and green really stand out against the dull, desaturated blues and reds in the brickwork over there on the right side. It gets a feeling that things are emerging from this really swirly, cold snowstorm happening in here. Even even in this painting, there's an overall bright feeling, but the pants and the faces provide small rests in the intensity. And in fact, they make the bright colors feel even brighter. So if you love bright colors, you may want to embrace dull ones just to provide contrast and to also amplify the saturated colors. Finally, saturation is contextual. Its brightness really depends on other colors that are in the painting. For example, this square appears to be a light desaturated red-orange, right? However, in relation to all the other colors in this painting, all the other saturations, it becomes the hot bright spot at the edge of that upside down funnel shaped object. And let me just do that again. So you can see there's a rectangle there, and you see that in context of the whole painting, it is actually the brightest thing. With painting, you can control saturation better than almost any other material or process. That said, the hue, saturation, and value variable system is used by many other processes. This is a screen capture of a Photoshop tool that is very valuable for choosing colors. And you can see there's hue, saturation, and lightness in there. The more you learn to control your saturation, the more sophisticated your work will become.